Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this time I'm going to be going over Metroid Dread Report Volume 3, 7 points that define the 2D saga. So what you may have noticed is that we actually haven't had a specific video on the channel covering Volumes 1 and 2. We have talked about the details in those reports from different videos, but this time around we're going to just go ahead and actually start doing specific breakdowns for the different reports, or at least we'll see how this one goes. But yeah, we're going over every detail here, talking about it, extrapolating what the developer transmissions mean, and that's pretty much what the focus is this time around. Now, before we jump into things, let me very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. So for the first of the 7 points that define the 2D saga, they actually start talking about Samus Aran. But before we jump into that, I want to sort of touch on how they're sort of taking this as an opportunity to talk about the history of Metroid dating back to 1986. And what's interesting about this is that basically we are kind of getting a celebration of the Metroid franchise. Yes, they showed off Metroid Dread at E3 and it's had such a big focus with it coming out the same day as Switch OLED and having all those treehouse segments and all the marketing and such. But even with these reports, we're getting so much information about the Metroid series every 2 weeks or so, and that's very exciting. Metroid hasn't had this much of an emphasis on with Nintendo's marketing in such a long time, and we're going to be getting more information as we approach the release for Metroid Dread. So that's just something that's kind of really nice to see. We're actually seeing some level of a series celebration here when it comes to Metroid's 35th anniversary. But anyway, this is what they say with the transmission from the dev team in relation to Samus. Many people know Samus from Super Smash Bros. By the way, Zero Suit Samus Fighter, who also appears in Smash Bros, is the same Samus, but without her power suit. In the Metroid Dread game, Samus' suit appears to have changed quite a bit from her previous missions. In the Metroid Fusion game, Samus' suit was greatly transformed after the emergency removal of pieces eroded by the X Parasite and a life-saving injection of the Metroid vaccine, resulting in an organic appearance for her suit. Now her suit is gradually returning to its original form, mechanical power suit form. So what's kind of interesting about this is that they allude to Fusion, and I actually just finished playing through Fusion from beginning to end, and at the end of Fusion, Samus's suit can sort of continually changes throughout the game, but at the very end it does sort of reach a form that is reminiscent of her original sort of form that you see in Smash Brothers, by the way, with the big shoulder pads, the sort of design we see in Metroid Prime and Super Metroid. She has that form at the very, very beginning of Metroid Fusion and loses it, and then also competes against it because the X Parasite takes its form. And at the very end, you do obtain something similar to it. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar, at least in terms of color and hue, and in strength as well. And now we've seen it sort of continue to develop. Now she has closer to the actual shape in terms of the bigger shoulder pads and such, but there is still sort of what appears to be something left over from that initial sort of recreation or fusion of event that occurred when she got attacked by the X Parasite and they tried to bring her back with the Metroid DNA. You actually can kind of see like sort of like a fleshy, sort of weird, sort of blue, veiny internal that's packaged around all this white and light blue plating, and obviously the red parts as well with Samus's sort of chest plate and helmet. And what I would say what's really interesting about that is that it does sort of suggest that there is a development here. It's not like they're sort of ignoring what happened in Fusion. No, this is building off of it. The effects of the X Parasite and the Metroid DNA, the vaccine that was created, those effects are still on Samus. He is still a part of what she is. It's not just like that was just an element for Metroid Fusion. No, they are still elements going into Metroid Dread. So for the second part, they start talking about the Metroid. The Metroid is this creature you see right here. It's a creature we've seen all throughout the Metroid series. But initially, the Metroids were actually created by this ancient species, the Chozo, to combat against the X Parasite. But anyway, this is what they say in the transmission. You may not know if you haven't played the series before, but this character that looks like a jellyfish is a titular Metroid. I'm sure some of you may have thought that the character Samus was named Metroid. The name Metroid comes from the Chozo word meaning ultimate warrior. While the Metroids have already gone extinct by the time of the events of the Metroid Dread game, it could be fun to speculate about what role they play in this adventure. So this is actually really interesting for a few different reasons. So yes, the Metroids have supposedly gone extinct. However, in Metroid Fusion, you do find a testing center that has a whole bunch of Metroids, and you fight a fully developed Metroid at the end as well. And supposedly all of it is destroyed, and the thinking is, well, there's no more Metroids. But this is a Metroid game, so why wouldn't there be any more living Metroids? Perhaps some more are alive somewhere. That's totally possible. But as you can sort of see with this image right here, it's sort of alluding to how they use the Metroids to create a vaccine to change the DNA in Samus to combat the X Parasite. So you could also argue that Samus herself has actually become somewhat of a Metroid. And if we go back to the Chozo terminology here, Metroid means ultimate warrior. And who raised Samus to be a warrior? The Chozo. And what is empowering Samus to stay stronger and be alive and to combat the X Parasite? The Metroid DNA, which were designed to combat against the X Parasite. And now she is alive, potentially the final last remnant of Metroid DNA, and she is the strongest warrior in the universe. So, you know, maybe there's something to this idea. Maybe Samus finally is Metroid. So all those people who thought that Metroid only referred to these little jellyfish creatures and not Samus herself, well, maybe there's some truth to that after all. For the next part, they go over and start talking about the 35 years of Metroid, how it started in 1986, how they remade the first Metroid on Game Boy Advance with Metroid Fusion, and then there was Metroid 2 in 91, but that was remade with Samus Returns on 3DS, and then there was Super Metroid in 1994, then Metroid Fusion, the big one that sort of is the predecessor or the prologue to the story for Metroid Dread, that came on Game Boy Advance in 2002. But anyway, this is what they say with the transmission from the dev team. We developed the Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Samus Return games, which are remakes of the first two games in the series, but it's been 19 years since a brand new title released in this saga, which means we've kept you waiting for more than half of the 35-year history of the entire series to see what happens next. As such, we have plentifully poured in what we have been preparing, and we believe everyone will be able to experience the game with many surprises within. There'll be an introduction to the story at the beginning of the game, so those who have not yet played the rest of the series can jump right in and feel at home. So this part is really just sort of telling everyone about the history of Metroid, letting them know that there is this long, sort of beautiful legacy of Metroid, but also that if you're new to the series, fret not, you have nothing to worry about. You can jump into this one, Metroid Dread, and it'll be totally fine. For the next part, they go on to talk about exploration, how it's such a vital part to the Metroid series. It's always about sort of digging deeper and exploring and backtracking as you gain more power-ups to find different ways to explore previous areas. But they also go into detail to the updated map. There's now icon highlights, there's now markers you can place to kind of go back to areas you missed before. There is a nice zoom-in feature now, so you can zoom in and out with more detail. You can see hidden item hints, and even during the main gameplay, you can press a button to sort of expand upon the minimap to see a little bit more of it without actually having to go into the map screen itself. So that's all really nice, but now let's go into the transmission. Since the Metroid series of games is all about exploring, it was clear to us that the map, the foundation of exploration, would be an important thing for us to focus on. This new map is powered up from previous traditional maps in terms of look and function, which we think will make exploring the world feel even smoother than before. In addition, players can enjoy greater freedoms when exploring compared to in previous installments, which might encourage you to try new strategies each time you play through. So what's interesting about this is that they say each time you play through. Are they building this game in a way where it will sort of perhaps be the kind of game that will be very replayable, that will have different types of playthroughs with different experiences? Perhaps, and that could be really exciting if done correctly, so I'm looking forward to seeing what actually happens once we get this game. For the next part, they start talking about Samus's arsenal and abilities, how that's such a pivotal part to the Metroid series. Here from the transmission, they say, every time Samus powers up, her offensive power and agility greatly increase. There will be more doors she can open, walls she can destroy, and paths she can take. With this kind of progression, you might look at paths and barriers in a different light than you did before, and we believe the players holding the controller can too feel this same growth alongside Samus. This is how all Metroid games have been. As you progress, you obtain more power-ups, and this just gives you more ways to explore the world and do more things. And as you progress, not only do you have more options in terms of the exploration, but also you are straight up stronger and you can take more hits and you have more platforming and agility abilities as well. For the next part, they start talking about the Chozo, and they show off some imagery here of the Chozo, but there's something very interesting they say in the transmission. In fact, Samus's equipment, like the power suit and arm cannon, are Chozo technology. When Samus was young, she lost her parents and her home in a tragic incident and was raised by the Chozo on planet Zebes. During that time, she received a Chozo DNA transplant, which allows her to adapt to environments that are otherwise harsh for humans. On planet ZDR, where the Metroid game takes place, there are various implications to be discovered surrounding Chozo civilization, which might connect with the game's story in some way. So here they are alluding to how there may be something interesting going on with the Chozo, and we see some interesting imagery here. There were hints in Samus Returns that perhaps there could be some sort of militarized Chozo, and we did see what appeared to be a living Chozo in the actual initial reveal trailer for Metroid Dread. But even here in the introduction to the Chozo, they say, once a very powerful force with both intelligence and military might, their position weakened over many years. Now, only a few of them have been sighted, and these remaining Chozo mostly try to avoid attention. So this almost feels like a retcon. Now, I'm not saying it's actually a retcon, it could simply be, well, there's more information now. But throughout the different Metroid games, the Chozo have been dead. They were an ancient species that raised Samus, but by the time she is an adult exploring the universe and fending off the bad guys, they are extinct, at least in every place she sort of explored up to this point. So here it's sort of confirming even more so that that footage we saw in the trailer could very well be one of those very few Chozo that are still around, and that is huge because we've never actually seen a living Chozo before. The ancients, the most important, most intelligent species of the Metroid universe. So that's going to be very exciting to see what sort of implications that may have for the overall Metroid story. And now on to the final segment for this report, the X Parasite. This parasitic life form is one of the deadliest in the universe. It can inhabit living or dead organic creatures and use their host genetic information to mimic them completely. The Metroid species was created by the Chozo to destroy the X. Thanks to Samus, the X have been reduced to cosmic dust, along with their native planet SR388. But then the transmission says, the story in this game starts with a mysterious transmission that implies the X, which Samus was gravely afflicted by and is thought to have destroyed in the Metroid Fusion game, may still exist. Are the X still out there, or is it something else? Please see for yourself. So what's really interesting about this is that in Metroid Fusion, it is suggested that there could be X Parasites elsewhere. But also at the end of Fusion, you take actions that may actually upset the Federation. So it's not entirely implied that the Federation will now be Samus's enemy at the end of Fusion, but there is definitely some suggestion that there could be a little bit of conflict there. So with Metroid Dread, we know that Samus is going to planet ZDR because the Federation asked for her assistance to go check it out. They initially sent out the Emmy to go explore that, yet the Emmy went missing. If you think about it, if there were actually X Parasites there, it's entirely possible that those X Parasites may have taken hold of the Emmy themselves, and maybe that's why the Emmy are coming at Samus. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that the Federation are actually trying to get rid of Samus, and they're trying to use the Emmy to do it. So maybe it's one or the other, or maybe it's both. Maybe they knew that the Parasites would take over the Emmy and strengthen and power them up, and then they would become a worthy threat to Samus, and she'd be trapped on planet ZDR trying to take them out. Potentially. These are just a few of the possibilities here, but there's definitely some very interesting elements going into Metroid Dread so far. We have the X Parasites, we have the supposedly dead Metroid, but with Samus sort of developing further with that Chozo DNA and that Metroid DNA, and then, you know, the remnants of the X Parasite having taken over her suit. And then there's also the supposedly surviving Chozo as well, and then the Emmy that are exploring planet ZDR. What's going on? And we haven't even brought up space pirates yet. I'm sure at some point or another, space pirates may come up as well, So it's going to be interesting to see if that plays another role into the story, because, I mean, it would be weird to see a Metroid game without Ridley, right? So we'll see what happens, but there's certainly more information to come. Perhaps a couple more weeks from now, we will get the next Metroid Dread report. But anyways, everyone, what do you guys make of all of this new Metroid Dread information? Let me know in the comments below. But that's all for now, everyone. This is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.